All right, I put a little timer down here so we'll know exactly where we are. This is John Davis. I want to thank John for coming down from Washington State, where he lives and is joining us. And I've known John for about 14 years or so, and it's always been enormous. This is not on. So, all right, can you just hear me? All right, we're going to do it like this. I've known John for about 14 years. He's an outstanding guy. It is a real pleasure and a privilege to collaborate with him, and it's really nice to have him here. He has been, he has a very sharp eye, and there's a number of things about Dayton that John has noticed in the process of working on this locomotive for this talk, and I'll let John describe some of those. You've already seen one of them, the hidden in front of everybody Stephen stack in the Dayton painting, which everyone's, I've known that painting for 30 years and I've never seen that. And John is just looking, oh, there's a Stephen stack in there. And that is kind of beautiful because it helps us understand Dayton in a lot of ways, and there's something really lovely about Dayton. And so without further ado, I'm going to get into it. Dayton is a lot of fun because, let's turn this thing on. There we are. Yep. Well, it's broken down right away.
You press the right arrow.
Nope, nope, it isn't lit up.
Push and hold the power. Drop it on the floor.
All right.
Here.
Watch how easy that is.
Okay, it worked a minute.
All right. Here's a little tint on Dayton. Dayton's a lot of lights. Dayton's a lot of fun because the past few times we've done a lot of Baldwins, and it's been pretty much all Baldwin all the time. If you really, with the exception of the lion, but no one cares about the lion. Lion's a booth. I mean, every railroad that starts up has the same problem, which is like doofus starter engines. And they build 3 doofus starter engines from the local builder, a little show of rah-rah, and they almost simultaneously, very wisely, order engines from an established maker whose learning curve was about 30 years earlier. You don't want a learning curve when you're buying engines from a maker who has just figuring out where to put the wheels.
You do if one of your board of directors owns the place.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So pretty much by the time Dayton is built, you get this really lovely, learning curve, which is on the part of the V&T, which is already now set. Baldwin. Baldwin caters to startup railroads, and all the railroads that I've noticed in Nevada and California use either Baldwins or Porters, with the exception of the Central Pacific, whose own story we're going to get into a little bit in a minute. And so the arrival of Dayton on this all Baldwin roster, with the exception of the booths, which don't matter, is really extraordinary. It brings up a little situation called dogs and cats, or cats and dogs. And cats and dogs is a large problem faced by railroad master mechanics and anyone in charge of the motive power system, which is a dilemma, because you want to have the easiest, most efficient locomotive system possible. You want to have something which provides for your motive power needs, and you don't want an esoteric collection of idiosyncratic objects. Think Southwest Airlines with its all 737 fleet, very efficient. These guys are kind of like that. So the arrival of, there we are, Dayton right over there, with these magnificent Baldwins, and then this beautiful engine is really distinctive. And the whole thing that makes it really wonderful, I think, for us is that the Dayton is an example of West Coast ingenuity and design developed by the Central Pacific to suit its own needs. They're not interested in suiting the needs of anyone else. They're not a commercial builder. Baldwin builds to suit the mass market. Andrew Jackson Stevens is interested in building to suit the needs of the Central Pacific Railroad and to suit his own ideas of what is fitting and right. And so everything about the Dayton reflects Andrew Jackson Stevens' ideas of a suitable, powerful, appropriate fitting railroad system developed indigenously on the West Coast, but involving elements of the best East Coast practice combined into a single whole. I think it's really extraordinary that Dayton and Columbus actually got built, because he was not in the commercial market. They didn't hang a shingle out at Sacramento saying, hey, we'll build locomotives, we'll be happy to do it for you. No. I get the impression from this whole process he was a little exasperated at the process, or at least I don't think he ever built any other engines alone. He was happy with the way they came out, but I'm also very interested in that it took 2 months or 6 weeks to deliver Dayton. So it's kind of an interesting factor going on, but that's outside of our talk. This is Dayton as it would have looked around 1876 or so. It is fitted pretty much with its as-built fittings. It has the Bowker's stack. Is that Mr. Bowker's stack? Was that the balloon stack that Mr. Bowker developed? Or?
It's not the one he patented, but that would have been put on while he was the master mechanic of the B&T.
We do not yet know exactly when this stack was put on, and there's a good deal of thoughtful discussion. But around this time, and certainly by 1878, the stack was installed. So to give an idea of how this engine came, I thought it would be a good idea to go into the Central Pacific shops, which is also having a problem with cats and dogs, as to why the entire, how Dayton actually came to existence. Because most books sort of describe that they just one day decided it'd be a lot of fun to build a whole bunch of engines. But there's always something underneath that. And what it is that the Central Pacific, when Andrew Jackson Stevens takes charge of its motive power, is made up of nearly 200 locomotives of every conceivable dimension, from builders, some of whom are no longer in business, making the idea of getting parts for this interesting roster really challenging. I mean, the Central Pacific bought engines from every which way just in order to get the road built and to have enough power to build this massive, massive railroad. And suddenly you have to make sense of it. And a lot of them are already worn out. There's going to be a lot of times to figure it out. And some of these engines are just not the final direction of railroading. I love Danforth Cooking Company, but this is not the final solution. This is not the direction of the future. You do not put that cylinder up there and then jam a pair of close-coupled 1840. This style of trucks was in fashion in 1840. That is not the future. But what you do is you look at the more modern power, you look at the most advanced ideas. This is McKay and Aldous. Daniel McKay, one of the McKay brothers, is responsible for the great clipper ships. Just suffice to say that anyone who has the wherewithal to build the flying cloud is able, more than able, to have a family concept of building graceful, handsome locomotives. And if you want to improve your fleet, you look to the very best designs and you start to put that into place. And here we have nice straight lines, lean lines. This is Mr. Stevens' stack. The first thing that any master mechanic does when he gets charge of a railroad is he has a big bag full of smokestacks, and he puts the stacks on every single engine he can find. And this is his way of marking territory. And you always know when a new master mechanic has arrived because all the stacks change. It's sort of like when the airline livery changes, you know there's a new CEO. So I'd like to talk just briefly about choosing a rational model. That looks a lot like Dayton, doesn't it? Doesn't that look like Dayton? It looks like a big Central Pacific, except that it's a Rhode Island locomotive, or McKay and Aldous machine, fitted up with a Stevens stack. This is a Houseworth photo. It was taken around March 1870. It's part of a group of photographs that can be dated by various cars and elements to the first part of 1870. And you can see, and it's actually pulling a Pullman car. I think, is that a Pullman car? It certainly has a roofline of a Pullman car. And so this this is the way of the future. And he looks towards the best designs. This is the very best design in 1860s and 70s was the work of Mr. William Mason. And they have a number of Mason's locomotives on the Central Pacific. Mason is a textile manufacturer whose work, I'm just going to tell you that I think Mason's engine are the most important engines of the 19th century. He didn't develop certain things like level cylinders, but he put them in the right place. And every single manufacturer began to produce locomotives along Mason's lines. And when you see an engine that has level cylinders, when the dome is centered between the driving wheels, when you see that, you know that Mason's work has been followed and adopted. And when you look at the Inyo, you're looking at a vernacular Mason. Mason's first copies were made in the New England area in the 1860s. Let's see here. This is McKay and Aldous again. This is, again, you can see the same features, the same style of headlight bracket, the same styles of dome casings, the very same austere New England style cab, and spoked trucks. Mr. Mason famously said that he thought that solid plate wheels looked like cheeses, and he believed in spoked wheels. And he also disliked counterweights, even though Atlantic has one by this moment, because he felt it was ungraceful. And so the counterweights were actually concealed within the hollow spokes of the locomotive. But there's straight lines, very, very gracefully looking machines. Here's another engine. This is pulling a train on the wharf in San Francisco Bay. And this is the other influence, and this is a Norris Lancaster locomotive. This is construction number 67. Everyone will write down that all these, there's a total of 5 Norris Lancaster engines in the Far West. They're produced by the Norris Locomotive Works of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Their formal name is the Norris Locomotive Works, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So they're commonly called Norris Lancasters. They were big, brutish locomotives, fairly large boiler. They have a hefty scale. This is either the Merced or the Mariposa. I believe this is the Merced. It has a new stack, the Western Pacific line, which runs between Sacramento and Oakland, which is then owned by the Central Pacific, was experimenting with coal, and so they installed diamond stacks. The native Norris Lancaster stack is actually a great deal like the Stevens stack, and I sometimes wonder if it's an inheritance. But why would you suddenly divert from these beautiful, handsome Mason School engines to this Philadelphia School clunker? Well, the answer is literally accidental. This is a Norris Lancaster engine right here. You can tell, obviously. I don't have to tell you that this is a really bad wreck. And when you look at this photograph, it's frightening, and there's a lot of telescope cars. That's not funny. One of the little bits of humor about this is that a Nevada judge was in the water closet of one of them. And his death was reported that way in all the papers. Everyone knows he died sitting down.
Well, judges are always sitting.
This is the Sonoma, that same engine that you just saw lying on its side, as rebuilt by Andrew Jackson Stevens by November of 1872. This photograph was taken in April 1883, and after he had installed, he always tinkered with this stuff. And he had just installed new driving wheels. This is the new pattern driving wheels with counterweights cast in, and the new single-piece side rod, which is super futuristic. But you can also see this beautiful Norris Lancaster style yoke and the original Norris Lancaster bell. And that's the original Norris Lancaster boiler and frame. But all these other parts were developed by A.J. Stevens as repair parts for locomotives. And when you repaired a locomotive, you could either write to the East Coast and ask the Norris Works to send you a part, or you could just have a nice stock on these on hand, and you could start to put these things back in order. And having a carcass of a wrecked engine on hand was a great way for him to test out this principle. And so it wasn't to build engines, it was to make repair parts to maintain a fleet. But every master mechanic, alongside with this bag full of smokestacks, has passion to make his own engines, because that's the coming of age for master mechanics. It's how you hang your shingle. It's how you basically tell your contemporaries that you know your craft, that you have mastered it. And so they announced the opportunity to build 10 locomotives for their fleet. They're all for use on the Western Division between Sacramento and Oakland. And this is the design. And so you can see the Mason-style wheels right here with no counterweights. He doesn't go super crazy. And another thing about him is that he doesn't stand on ceremony. If he likes, he has a weird thing about fireboxes, so he can't not tinker with the firebox. He cannot leave a firebox alone. So he has his own ideas about fireboxes, so the dome is slightly off kilter. But here you have a Mason-style bell stand, the Mason-style headlight bracket, the Mason-style iron frame, and everything, and yet you have the Norris-Lancaster proportions and the Norris-Lancaster bracket, which makes for a very powerful locomotive. And when building these engines, they said that all the best points of the Eastern builders have been adopted, which is quite true, and that they'll all be made alike, and they have stock parts on hand. Of course they do, because they're going to outfit the entire fleet. So here are the lists of engines that have been made. Here's the V&T engines, which were put right in the middle of it. This engine is kind of interesting. Construction number 3 was a construction engine sent to Southern California. It is commonly listed as being part of the LA and San Pedro Railroad. It was not. It was simply an independent contractor's engine used to build the Southern Pacific line north of Los Angeles and then outward. It apparently was named Wilmington and was kept in the shops, but all of them were freighters except for 2, the 88 and the 87, 188 and 187, which had a slightly different cylinder bore and slightly thicker tires. So they used the same castings to produce engines for both passenger and freight service. This is the freighter. This is number 55. This is photographed in October, around October 1873, after it had already been in service. They pulled it in, Mr. John Todd, who a photographer of Sacramento who liked photographing sporting things, happened to be called in, and he photographed this engine. And here is the passenger, and you can see the slightly thicker tires and everything, and air brakes, because passengers dislike being in wrecks. And this nice, handsome finish. And this has been, both of these, this particular photograph made by Mr. Todd is apparently sent over, is distributed widely, because this is how you distribute and show your fellow contemporaries your ideas about locomotives. And he distributes this thing, and this photograph, this particular photograph, is part of the history of the Carrie Barton's painting of the Dayton. So here's one of the freighters in service, actually in the wild. You can sort of see that. And here's another freighter. This is 135. This is at Elk Grove. I just think this is a really beautiful, beautiful shot. It has a complete train attached to it. Here are the passenger engines. This is 188 in the wild. It's been converted to injectors by this point. This is around 1880. And they got rid of the black cylinder paint, and they put on planished iron jackets. And this is the 187. This is a really nice detail. See, that is a awning. You can tell these guys are getting comfortable when they put awnings on. The engines later ended up in commuter service out of Oakland. This is one of them. Pulling, its end is moving in reverse. And H.S. Small, who, like normal fireboxes, rebuilt the engines with normal fireboxes and wider profiles. But enough of that. Let's go to the Dayton. Then a little announcement that Dayton is built. Accompanies what I think is just brilliant, that the Central Pacific was testing Dayton by hauling revenue freight. And they apparently did this for some time, because it takes a while for Dayton to finally make its way over the hill. And you just kind of, I just learned this, and Stephen pointed this news article out for me. I thought, wow, that's great. So I looked it up, and I thought, wow, my goodness. And then I looked up the booklet on the Dayton, and it says 6 weeks before it actually gets over the hill. And so it's sort of like, wow, he's just like, yeah, that's a frenemy situation, right? They're just sort of order your locomotives from your frenemy. They'll get nice revenue service while using your machine. So here's the Dayton as built. And it's got this These are stacked. Oh, there we are. And I just thought I'd let you do a little beauty shot. John, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay, so this is Dayton pretty much as delivered with as a coal burner with the Stevens stack. And then we'll go into some of the structural features that show up on the Dayton. As Jim was saying, the Stevens design derives a lot from the New England builders, Mason, McKay and Aldous in Rhode Island, and also the general proportions of Norris Lancaster. This is a lithograph of the Mason locomotive Highland Light, which is a really ideal representation of Mason's design. Mason favored just a lot of straight lines, nice clean proportions, simple striping for a lot of the decoration. And again, you still see the bell stand, headlight bracket, and other features that would show up on the Stevens design. And this is a close-up of a cylinder saddle on a McKay and Aldous locomotive. And this is Mason? Yeah. Okay, on a Mason locomotive. And this was a pretty typical feature of the New England engines. You see this curved flange on the outer edge. And this same style of cylinder saddle was copied by Stevens, and it's quite distinctive from the more flat-faced cylinder saddles that you see on the Baldwins. And here you can see this saddle recreated on the 3D model of the Dayton. And this is the standard Mason bell stand which he used throughout the 1850s and 1860s, and Stevens faithfully copied it on his locomotives. And he used this bell stand into the early 1880s on some locomotives he was still building, some commuter engines for the Oakland passenger service. There's another example of the bell stand on a Mason. And this is one interesting feature that we came across on the when we were recreating the paint scheme for Dayton as delivered, and it mainly derives from the builder's photo of the number 188, where you can see that what appears to be a black border outside of the gold stripes. And something similar shows up in the Barton painting of the locomotive, where she painted in these darker borders on the dome bases. So that was a nice little detail that we decided to bring into the 3D model. And Dayton, the Central Pacific Builders plate, is pretty much a direct copy of the McKay and Aldous style, with these scrolls on the side. There's the plate recreated. And the tender frame brackets on the Central Pacific tender frame are really distinctive, and they're also directly copied from the New England style. And you can see these same brackets also on the number 25 10-wheeler, because it got a replacement Central Pacific tender frame after a wreck in the 1930s?
Not that late.
Not that late.
No.
And this is a shot of a couple of Central Pacific 10-wheelers in the wild, where Stevens has replaced the original wood tender frames with this same style of iron frame. And there's the frame on the 25. And Jim, do you want to cover some of the Lancaster stuff?
Sure. All right. Well, I kind of like Norris Lancaster engines because I think they are just really funky as a little builder, and I think it's also really kind of beautiful to see, how certain influences can make their way in. And this is a good photograph. This is the Vice Admiral Farragut. It was produced in 1865 for the Union Pacific. Norris Lancaster got a couple of Western customers all doing. One of the neat things about Norris Lancaster is that they always like to paint ships on the sandboxes. And this, when I looked at it closely, is a steam frigate with a smokestack belching smoke. And this ship, you know, of course, the engine's named after Farragut, who just won at the Battle of Mobile Bay, where he said, you know, damn the torpedoes. Well, this is the USS Hartford on the side of a sandbox. I think that's pretty great. Some of the fast Norris Lancaster engines have paintings of the yacht America, which is really lovely. But let's go down to the prosaic stuff down below. This is this beautiful guide yoke, nicely shaped, very elegant proportions, very lovely, very lethal. There's nothing there to protect the rod in case that rod drops. And so, of course, the engine would pole vault and overturn. So when AJ copied that design, he improved it by adding this little lip that would save the rod from falling onto the ground. And the way he did it is really elegant. He curves around, he copies the Edward Norris design, and then he just lips it in like that and curves it in. So just like it's coming along and then boop, like that underneath. And so he's paying homage to the original design, improving it in a way that is respectful to his contemporary in Pennsylvania. And he produces this design. Now, one Norris Lancaster engine survives today, the Mariposa, and it has been heavily rebuilt over the years. But it's in Southern California, and I have the access, you know, to look at it. I just drive 15 minutes, and there it is. And the Norris Lancaster guide yokes are still on the Mariposa. And they have had bolted-on U-shaped additions, which guarantees you that they are the original ones. And it's like that is maybe the only part of that engine left from 1865. It's really perhaps part of the frame. But it's just really beautiful to sort of see that element. So let's go on to here. Well, all right. Let's give another. You saw that? We're going to go on to the painted ornamentation. Now, we have a lot of photographs, and the photographs are great. We get to see where light and dark are, where the different colors are by the tones of gray in the photographs. But working out the color is always something of a challenge, and you can never really feel 100% confident, but it does help a great deal when you have something to help you. First of all, I just want to point out that Mr. Yarrington had no particular idea about the paint schemes on his engines except that they be high quality and suitable. He felt that they should look respectable. He sort of, first he says, paint them as you want. I'm sure they'll be creditable. He's kind of like kicking that little in. He says they better look nice. But it basically says, paint them as you feel. So he kind of, this is very typical attitude. Give us a first-class style passenger engine. Give us a fancy freight, a plain freight, things like that. Specifics are very general at that time. And so you kind of get this notion. The Central Pacific was in the process of establishing basic paint schemes for its fleet. And those would evolve. The first style that they tried in the early 1870s is very beautiful and very complex. It's multiple panels, lots of stripes, a number medallion, and there are at least 3, 4, maybe 5 colors on that tender alone. I do not know the colors of that tender. I would really love to, but suffice to say, if you have 200 engines and they're all painted like that, it really slows down the process of getting an engine back on the road. So beginning in 1873, and possibly late 72, I don't know, we have this style, which is simplified. It has the number in the middle. It has the initials, a pair of stripes to make it look decent, and then some ornamentation around the rest of the engine. And one thing, all 1870s engines on the Central Pacific were fitted with Williams headlamps that depicted beautiful landscapes. Very typical popular feature. And that shows up in the Barton Rulison painting of the Daytons. Dayton had that feature. One thing is that the number was always centered, flanked by the initials, and this was a style influenced by Danforth Cook and Company, and is one of the peculiar things. Another aspect of it is that the number was usually in gold or in imitation gold, flanked by colored letters. By the 1880s, they got rid of all that. The engines are now a plain solid black. The passenger engines and possibly some of the freighters have red wheels with black rims and hubs. And the lettering is all in color. It's all red with green shades. We don't have to worry about that, but this will show you the progression towards simplification that prevailed in the 19th century and created this wonderful modern style by the 1880s. This photograph of the Dayton clearly shows the stripes, the number in the middle, the little scrolls, and the initials on either side. So we have pretty conclusive evidence that the Dayton was painted in a standard Central Pacific style. And here you can see that style as it looks, on the 55. And then, as we have it on the Rulison painting, the Carey Barton and Rulison paintings. We've called it Rulison painting for so long, but now, in the process of this discussion, we're kind of learning how to call it the Barton Rulison painting, but now everyone's careful to call it the Carey Barton Rulison painting. And Carey Barton, by the way, is the wife of a roundhouse hostler on the Virginian Truckee, who later lists herself. He dies young, and she moves to Kansas City, where she calls herself an artist. And she's actually quite a good artist, but in an amateur 1800s way. And we're really grateful to her, because what she has done is given us an opportunity to know what those colors are by a fairly fair assessment of this machine. Amateur artists often make up for the lack of artistic skill by a devotion towards detail. And so they know that if they get all these little things right, they'll have a good painting. And so we can see the headlight with its headlight painting. It's not the greatest representation, but you saw that there's scrolls up there. You can see all the details, and it fits in. So when we put that together, we see a black frame, red wheels, and the upper works are done in a sort of a brownish red. And there's a lot of really wonderful things about that. Dayton is what we call a three-color engine. And remember, we talked about that a couple of years ago on the Moguls, that they would have green frames, brown upper works, red wheels. This is a version of that, and that was a popular way of doing it. The Glenbrook is startlingly modern in having just one color used throughout. That's a really startling thing. So red wheels come into fashion around 1852. They're not there in the beginning. They had to be invented. And then they were like really fashionable up through the middle 1870s, and then they fall from fashion. And they're used occasionally after that point. But as we're about to see later on, maybe not as long as you may have thought on the V&T. I like the fact that we have black rims on the wheels and a black frame. Black frames may seem obvious, but no, that's a specific style. Most frames were painted wine color or green or red or something like that. And black frames were specifically a New England style of the 1850s. And William Mason, being a New Englander, thinks it's very suitable and appropriate, and he maintains it. It's a nice color. It won't show you your cracks, so you have to really look at everything. That's why bright apple green frames were really popular. But it is a very useful, suitable color. And the V&T took to it. I mean, on the Glenbrook, the first layer of paint on the lower works of the Glenbrook after the Baldwin layers was black. First time they repainted the Glenbrook's frame, black. They went straight to it. It's a very popular feature. So here's the brownish reds. Brownish reds really come into fashion in the 1860s and 70s. And they are popular because they're elegant in appearance, and they are also very durable, and they're cost effective. They're a little expensive, but not crazy. So you would get a very elegant engine. This engine was drawn in 1875, or 76, I think, And it's now showing a transition to like black panels, a mixture of browns and blacks. They're sort of darkening down by the middle 70s. And we're going to see a little bit of that later on too, but it's not going crazy. So the Dayton has certain of these elements, the use of blacks, the use of brownish reds, and then a few elements of red. These are the Dayton's driving wheels. I think this is really lovely. You have the black rims, which is a Stevens feature. We saw that in the 188. The frame is black. It's striped in red, and we have gold stripes out here. And then the photograph showed very dark centers, and we've done that in black to balance out. And it looks pretty nice. It actually has a very pleasing appearance. And this wonderful thing is a Primavera wood panel. The Stevens cabs were said to have Primavera wood, an ornate or ornamental Mexican wood used in the panels. And the photograph of Dayton in 1878 clearly shows a slightly lighter cab panel. And so that helps us to show this Primavera wood. Here's the Downhart Monkey Works of the Dayton. There you can see the mud drum. That's a mud drum right there. It sort of filters out all the mud from all the bad water. And you can see here's the crosshead pump, and it goes up and down and right into there. And mostly black with a little bit of gold and red stripes. Do you want to add anything about that? Or you put those stripes there. What do you think?
Well, for a lot of the striping on the lower works, I mainly went by the 188 photo and just trying to figure, going by the shade of gray, whether it was gold stripe or a red stripe. And the red striping also comes partly from when the restoration was done on the Governor Stanford at Sacramento. The oldest layers on the tender trucks, which are kind of the standard Central Pacific style tender trucks, they had the lowest layers that were black with fine red striping and white striping, and we'll see that later on the truck springs, where the truck springs alternated red stripe, white stripe, red stripe, white stripe, and the style of that striping matched what we could see in the 188 builder's photo. So that's kind of where all that came from.
The black cylinders on the Dayton are taken largely from the Barton Rulison painting, and they're also evident in photographs of the prototypes of the 188 and the 55, where the cylinders are entirely painted. It's kind of interesting to have black cylinders, but if you think of the paint scheme as above and below and basically componentially, it makes a good deal of sense. It's a variation. Some would paint them another way, but they're very, very down to earth. This bell stand is one of the areas of Dayton that research found, I think, what is very close to the original paint. It was very challenging doing the paint research on the Dayton, and there were, I think, a lot of twists and turns, but they found red stripes on black with the second layer of yellow stripes on black. And the red stripes fitting in so much with the other red stripes on from other evidence seem to fit, and so we put the red stripes here as a black bell stand. It also fits the headlight bracket. Screw the headlight bracket.
It's there.
Jim,
Yep.
on all of the Mason bogies, they have the double bell cord. So the engineer or the conductor or the fireman could ring the bell. Do you think that came originally with a double bell cord and disappeared in the V&T shop, or is that the way it was originally?
Well, I think we'd want to take a look at the shot of the 55 or the 88 to see how Stevens built its bells. I don't think that they had a double bell cord. Oh, we're going back in time. There's the cab. Isn't that elegant? Isn't that just beautiful? Nice, simple proportion. I love the fact that the style goes all the way across. Baldwin engines aren't like that. That style is monkeying around because the windows are all at different heights. Stevens, made his cabs very, very cleanly done, and he put, I love the ornamentation. It's like he had a bag full of ornaments. And he that up on top of it. It's really the look of it. And there they are. You can see the ornaments. These are taken from the 188 because it's slightly closer in painting and production to the Dayton than the 55. And here's the tender with its stripes. So let's take a look at that. You can see there's a little shade down there, and there's a fine light mark right along there. And it's not on the Carrie Barton painting. Now, there's one really interesting thing about the Carrie Barton painting, and this is the really fun part. She seems not to have set out in her heart of hearts to paint the Dayton. She seems to have come across the builder's photo of the 188. Says, "Oh, my husband's works in the railroad as a hostler. Make this. That's fun." And she starts here, and she paints this, and her first layer, she paints the tender in black with yellow stripes, and right here in raking light is a blob that resembles the letter C. And if you look at it, you think, oh. But then she overpainted that. Her husband comes in with a, well, that's nice, but why don't you paint the Dayton? It's right over here. And so she goes, oh. And so she comes in and looks, does some field notes. And they're not holding the Dayton out so she can paint it. They got to earn money with the thing. So she comes in and looks. So she paints it brown and puts on, there's another V here. And she's carefully painting around the stripe. She's like going up to the stripe. And if you really look at it under light, Wendell Huffman was very kind enough to let me take a look at this painting. And I'm really grateful to have that opportunity, because when you major in art history and you like trains, every now and then you get to put the two of these things together, and it all pays off. And we saw that she had simply overpainted brown onto the black tender and given it a brown shade. The first V was not to her liking, so she overpaints that, and then we have this layer right here that we can all see. And by the time she got to the engine, she was well on her way to painting the Dayton. So there's no overpainting or anything like that at all. She had pretty much switched over, and everything is good. There's no hidden air pumps underneath the Dayton painting. It's all Dayton. But here is the 188, and the 188 has a little bit of a variation in which all the letters are the same rendering way. But it does have the scroll work, which shows up in a number of pictures. And there you can see, just see the little fine light stripes on the leaf springs, and also the stripes on the tender trucks. Very busy engine. And this is how John reconstructed. You can see the red and white stripes on the springs, the red striping throughout the trucks. And we've reconstructed it with the standard Central Pacific 70s style, the gold letter and the colored letters on either side. Do you want to add anything? Or?
Yeah, just briefly, the different colors on the drop shadows comes partly from what we've observed on several of the builders' photos, the 55, and also a wonderful in-service photo of the TD Judah, the 422, where we noticed that the shadows on the letters were lighter than the shadows on the numbers. And we know from the later 80s scheme that Central Pacific liked green shadows on their lettering, so I went with the green shadows on the letters and then the red for the number.
And here's a detail.
Use the swimming pool, please.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Well, here's a detail of the stack, and here you see the Stevens stack that John found underneath it. And here you see this wonderful Williams brand headlight. Williams headlights were used throughout the Central Pacific system in the 70s. There's lovely paintings. And here's John's reconstruction of this headlight. You want to talk about it?
You can.
All right. I really like Williams headlights. I like them. I think this is a perky chimney cap. I think it's great to have a perky chimney cap. I think it's pretty great to have this beautiful landscape painting. We have the a Williams headlight shell for the Lion in the shop that I work in Southern California. It just sits there next to the engine front of the smoke box, should that ever come together. And to put this headlight together was a lot of fun. And this is a picture of the Clipper. This is Central Pacific number 96. And one of the things that came to light while we were producing this is that CP engines sometimes have what seem to be identifiable images on the paintings, and this one is very similar to a popular Alfred Bierstadt painting of Yosemite Valley, looking west. Whoops. And it is, you know, you can see El Capitan on the side, and so they also know that a Central Pacific Shops painter was busy doing paintings of Yosemite. And so there's always a tempting image of what might have been on Glenbrook's, on Dayton's headlight. So this headlight itself is reconstructed from a surviving original. This is an original Williams headlight in the collection of Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History. It's off display right now, but John, doing what people who know computers can do, peeled off the surfaces of this headlight and plopped them onto the Dayton's headlight. And so you're looking at an actual, original Williams headlight on this drawing of the Dayton. And just for fun, this landscape painting happens to be on the other side of this one. So that is an actual Williams headlight landscape painting. That's pretty sweet. And there you can see the painting. Maybe it's Mirror Lake. It's been deposited. We don't really know. But it's rather beautiful. So there is the Dayton as she looks and as she stands. And you know, only thing left to do is to change the pilot and add a toolbox and everything. You can see the lighter panel, and it's just a lot of fun to work with her. So we'll end it like that. We've got a few more slides if anyone has questions, but that's pretty much where we are at Dayton 73. Thank you.
In the painting, it shows the smoke coming out and covers part of the stack. Was that her interpretation, or is there something about the stack that would allow that?
No, she is. Oops.
Yeah.
Okay. She painted it as a Stevens stack, and you can see the line of the Stevens stack coming up. But then she overpainted it with the lip of a balloon stack and painted out that by hiding it in the smoke to make it look like a balloon stack. And you know, it's like, wow, you know, did she change it when the stack was changed? And said, oh my God, she has no. Oh my God. Did she do it like that? You know, it's possible. Did she start off with the 188 picture and had that sketched in and then redid it when the stack? We don't know. We concluded before we even found this that it was very likely that the Stevens stack was part of the engine when delivered as part of its coal burning field, but and that it was changed at some point. We don't know when. We thought for a while this was evidence of that, but now it's legitimately a little bit in the air, but it may still be. It's all it is. Yeah.
What year was the painting done?
Stephen found that the Bartons were identifiably in Carson City from 75 to 77. They last appeared. So that would be a good window.
Probably.
Yeah.
One of your slides had 3 photographs on it showing the progression and design changes from 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the locomotive shown in the 80s had an eccentric on the main crank pin. And it looked like well-shot valve gear. Do you have any story behind that?
Oh yeah, that's a big story. A.J. Stevens, Andrew Jackson Stevens, developed an outside valve gear in the 1880s. And he was very well known to it. It's one of the great tragedies of the 19th century that he died just before it was to be accepted, and his successor had no interest in promoting his predecessor's invention.
So that was original application?
That's original application. It's not Walshart's, it's Stevens gear. It was apparently quite well known, and he, as a regional story, he first put it on a rebuilt engine, the Reno Switcher.
So this was outside Stevenson valve gear.
Yeah,
Is that right? Okay.
yeah.
Not Stevenson, Stevens.
Stevens, yeah, Stevens. All right, well, just real, oh, yeah.
All that striping on those things like the tender springs and such, gotta get dirty awfully fast. What would they do to clean them? Just put a hose down them or what?
Well, you call Mr. Barton. That's what he does. He spends all night wiping her down.
How often would you have to repaint?
3 years.
3 years, yeah. 4 years is the outer limits, but 3 years is about a good time. The engines were, you know, the engines could be like spot painted after an accident. They are very good at cutting in, but as an engine's overhaul or take care of, 3 years is a good progression. Yeah.
Yeah, if they were repainted, you think every 3 years, would they generally stick to the same colors and then change them later on with the rest of the engines, or?
Well, thank you. Yeah.
We have another half hour.
There we go. They, VNT seems to have kept, well, certainly by 1878, they've kept the original style.
Okay.
You know, if that engine is redone, it's, you know, it was redone in 77, late 77, so it was kept to the original style, but over time things changed. And here, I mean, John was wondering, here's this nice